I had intended this talk today to be quite informal. I thought it was going to be students only. And with students only, I can speak far more frankly because professors tend to be much more cynical. So, with that, let me talk about propelling your career. And this is just based on different things that I have seen, things that work and things that don't work, and things that I've done. So try non-traditional things. This is really important for students. If you take your career and you stick with the small area that you learn, so say you're going to be a professor, and you just stay very close to the areas in which you are trained, it's really hard to do anything great. But when you take your area and you move into another domain, amazing things happen, and I'll give you examples of that. But in the corporate world, be prepared to travel, to do whatever you're called upon. Learn the company. So I have a friend who he graduated from Rice in engineering a number of years ago, started out as a base level engineer, ended up as the CEO of ConocoPhillips, which is a huge chemical company. And he did a leveraged buyout from Conoco, the oil company. And so we had this discussion. And I said, tell me your story. And I didn't just want to hear it. Well, I heard it from him over lunch. I said, you got to come over to my house on a Sunday afternoon when I have a lot of students. I want you to sit at a table and tell them what you just told me. How do you go from being a bachelor's level undergraduate degree in engineering to being the CEO of a very large and powerful company? How do you do that? Isn't that interesting? How does one pull that off? Basically, you have to be prepared to travel wherever they send you. So he talks about how he was sent to Spain. He learned Spanish, and he moved there with his family and lived there for about 7 or 8 years. And he visited every site that the company sent him to. He really learned the company, and you do whatever you're called upon. So in industry, this is one of the things you got to be able to do. You get in a company, you want to learn that company and learn broadly within that company. In academia, you want to try something far outside your comfort zone, not a little bit outside, far outside. Everything that I do in my group is far outside my comfort zone. So far, I don't know what I'm doing. The students have to figure it out, and then they tell me what they've done, and I parrot what they say, and people think I really know it. And the students do so much of this that the more I tell people, no, this wasn't me, this was my students, and I tell them that, they think I'm all the more magnanimous, that I would be giving the credit to my students. They just don't get it. That my brain is limited, but what I do is I hire people in their 20s. What happens in their 20s? Their neurons are firing at an enormous rate. Take a person in their 20s, their reflexes are very fast. Compare that to someone, say, my age. Their reflexes are much slower. Do you ever see an old person try to write a check? It's like, I mean, just to write a check, just to sign their name, takes minutes, and you're like, come on now. When you're in your 20s, just things are firing, and it's the same thing with your creativity. And so you get people around you, and you inspire them, and I've come to be merely a motivational speaker to my students, my graduate students, and I provide them with a credit card. Give them a credit card, and I'm a motivational speaker, and they do all these great things, and they make me look really good. And I remember when a student walked up to me, he said, let's work on batteries. I said, oh, come on. So many people out there are working on batteries. We're not going to work on batteries. He said, no, I really want to try this. I really think we can apply this and work on batteries. And I said, okay, if we're going to work on batteries within 2 years, I want to be one of the best groups in the world in batteries. How can I say such a thing? I can't, but I just said it anyway. So he goes away in his mind that he's got to do something really great. And what happens? Within a couple of years, we're publishing some of the best papers on batteries. Big shot comes from another university to Rice, and as he's giving his talk, he's referring to my work. And I'm like, he's the big shot, not me. But this kid pulled it off. He pulled it off. When we were solving the synthetic brain that I talked about last night, that molecular computer, there were 2 students. It was a husband and wife team. They were in computer and applied mathematics, and I needed somebody with a mathematics background to really crack the system. Because what you generate is a series of nonlinear differential equations, a lot of them. This is very hard to solve. So much so that my colleagues in computer science said it can't be solved. So I heard these 2 students were leaving Rice with a master's degree because particularly the husband within this couple did not feel challenged enough, and he was going to take a job with Microsoft. And I went to their home and I begged them to come and do a PhD with me. Yes, I begged them. And he said to me, well, you know, I was praying and I felt the Lord told me to go to Microsoft. I say, you know, I've never heard the Lord speak that clearly. And if you tell me he told you to go to Microsoft, then the conversation's over because I can't argue with God. But I want you to really think about this. The next day, the Lord told him to work with me. And he came to work with me, and the guy was amazing, and he cracked the problem. The result was I became a faculty member in the Department of Computer Science at Rice University as well. That's how monumental it was that he cracked this problem. But he was also scatterbrained. The most creative people in my group have been scatterbrained. And I wrote an article recently called Genesis of Creativity. I wrote it a few years ago, and it published in ACS Nano. And where I interviewed the 3 most creative students that I had during my career. And they were all doing wild and crazy things, certainly non-traditional. But they all had the inability to even put together a weekly report. I get a weekly report of all my students, and it's how I keep track of them. So if they're going down some rat hole, I steer them back. And I meet with them face to face, eyeball to eyeball. Tell me what you did this week, and we look over the report. I put it up on the screen. The people working on the same project are up there, and we're going back and forth. And several of them couldn't even put together the weekly report. If they did, it was just something scratched on paper, or they'd open up their laptop and show me data. I had a company, the first company that I started, where I learned not to start companies. And the chairman of the board was Michael Nesmith. Anybody here ever heard of Michael Nesmith? There you go. The Monkees. The Monkees were a rock group when I was a kid. They're contemporary with the Beatles. Them you've heard of, right? And Michael Nesmith was the bass player. The tall guy wore the hat, the wool hat all the time. Well, he started MTV. He was the founder of MTV. And so I asked him, how did you deal with such diverse personalities? Musicians are musicians. They and they're hard personalities to work with. He said, Jim, you have to expect from them what they can deliver, and they'll really deliver for you. But don't expect from them what they're unable to deliver. And I've always held on to that. These folks are so creative. They're like Rain Man. I mean, just amazing in what they can do. But they can't write a little document. Nonetheless, they would do these sort of things, and so we would do these untraditional things. You step far outside your comfort zone. And we'll give you an example of that in just a moment, and here it is. So we published this paper. This Journal of Organic Chemistry article was an article where I was highlighting things over my career. The actual work here was done in around 1989 or 1990, in that time frame. We had made this molecule because there was an article that came out of IBM. Now, where was I trained? I was trained as a synthetic organic chemist to make molecules that were suitable for pharmaceutical applications. This is not that. This is not for pharmaceutical applications. There was an article out of IBM that said if somebody could make a molecule like this, it could function as a switch, a molecular switch. And I called up the guy who published the paper, and this was before the days of email. This was in 1988, maybe. And I called him up. I said, has anyone ever made this molecule? He says, oh, no one's ever made it. It was all mind confined. So I said, I think we could make this. He says, oh, okay, do it. Well, we made it. When we published this paper, which is 1990, 1991, around in that time frame, I got a call from Scientific American. Now, Scientific American had a readership at the time of 25 million. Compare that to the readership of one of the journals that you normally publish in. I mean, it's just night and day. And the reporter from Scientific American said, I heard you've synthesized the most complex molecule ever synthesized. It's a joke. It's an absolute, but I didn't want to say that. He says, well, it's reasonably complex. But that's the view when I took something of a molecular structure and moved it into the electronics domain. Here is something that's about 2 nanometers long, and it's orthogonally fused, so if you were looking at that from the top, it would look like this. You couldn't wire this up at the time, nothing. But it got us into this area of molecular electronics, which just was taken off at the time. And then it later dovetailed into an unheard of area, the term that nobody used, and it was called nanotechnology. So that 10 years later, when this term of nanotechnology started becoming in vogue, people said, what is that? Other people would say, oh, this is stuff that Guy Tour does. All of a sudden, I found myself in the area of nanotechnology as the person of reference. This was not calculated. The only thing I calculated was to take the synthetic skills and do something non-traditional. You take your synthetic skills and you move outside your area, and then you take that skill set into a new area. And then what you do, people go, wow, how'd you ever think of that? That's kind of obvious from the skill set that I come from. One of the problems is that you end up sometimes rediscovering the wheel, and you don't learn it until you send a paper in for review, and the reviewer says, oh, this has been done in 1939 by Staudinger. Oh, okay, thank you. That happens when you enter a new area on occasion. But you take the risk. You go ahead and you do this. If you move across areas with your skill set, you can do amazing things when you move outside of your traditional area. This is something that can build mountains of great value, just mountains of gold, if you learn to write with a pen. Not an email, not a text. So you write letters by hand and send them by mail. In the United States, I say by U.S. mail, where you actually put a stamp on it. You can still do that, and you put it in a box, and they receive it like a week later. You send thank you notes to colleagues and acquaintances in business. You do this in academia. I will read a paper sometimes and say, wow, I wish I would have thought of that. And I will write a letter to that author, the corresponding author, and say, I was really impressed by your paper. I just wanted you to know that. They think, wow, an email is so cheap. It can come so easily. But that I took time to write a letter, and especially people of my generation, it means something to us. And every company you go into, it is going to be owned by people my age and older. So you say, who's that old guy walking around? Oh, that happens to be the founder and owner of the company. A handwritten letter means so much to them. You do that, and you keep a record of all the letters you've sent. Just start a spreadsheet. So there's some categories from a spreadsheet. So I wrote to Neil Lane. Neil Lane was the former director of the NSF, of the National Science Foundation, and then he was chief science advisor to Bill Clinton. He came and he taught a class for me because he's now a professor at Rice University, and he taught my class for me because I like my students to be exposed to key people. So I wrote him a letter of thanks, and I just put the date there. I have gone all over the world, and sometimes I'll go into another country and I'll sit down and visit with a professor, and the professor says, look at this on my wall, on their bulletin board. It's a letter from me to them from several years earlier that I don't even remember writing to them. But when you write so many letters, so every Saturday when I go into my office, the first thing I do is I sit down and I just write 5 letters to people that I met that week that I think could be key people to know, key influencers in the field, or key people that need a word of encouragement. If you learn to write handwritten letters, it will do you so much good. If I can afford 20 minutes to sit down, and these are short, I have these cards, already has my name and address in there, excuse me, and it's just 3 sentences. And I write them kind of big so it fills up the card. But it's just 3 sentences, 4 at the most. Fold it up and just fill out the address, and I drop it in the box and mail it. And you know, my colleagues, congratulations for promotion at Rice. Why would I do that? Because even though they're younger than me, very often they end up as dean, provost, and they remember me, that I was there encouraging them when they got tenure. Little things that you can do. Do this sometimes with secretaries. You're the best. Thank you for helping me with that project. They'll never forget that. I mean, the worst way, if you want to really mess up your career, get the department secretaries upset with you. Little things. When you go out on job interviews, everybody that you speak with on that interview, you write them a handwritten letter. You say, may I get your card? When you go back, you write them a handwritten letter. Thank you for taking the time to visit with me. Your work is amazing. People read that, well, wow, thinks my work is amazing. Really something. They're going to want to hire you. I tell students, you go out on a job interview, never say anything negative about where you're working. Never say, oh, Tour, you know, he stinks. You know, he's at Rice University. I hate that place. Don't say that. You may feel that way, but don't say it when you're on an interview, because they know you're going to end up saying it about that place too. Speak positively about everything, and when they describe their work to you, just say, wow, that is really something. And you speak positively of all the work you see. Don't say, oh, that was a dumb idea. Obviously, you've misassigned the structure. Just speak positively. And people will remember you, because people want around them people who are positive thinkers. You never want to hire people that, you know, drag their lunchbox to work behind them, complain around the water cooler. You never want those people. I don't want them around me. They just pull me down. I want people around me that are happy about life. You want to do that type of thing. You make friends. Work hard to build relationships with influential people in your profession. Work hard to do this. So there were poster sessions. You know, when you're an assistant professor or when you're a graduate student, you don't get invited to be the plenary lecturer, generally, at some national meeting. You could do a poster. So what I would do is I would have my poster there, and I would watch people as they went by. Famous person, I remember Virgil Perchek, the first famous person walking by my first poster when I was an assistant professor. Here's Virgil Perchek. I went out and I grabbed him by his arm. I said, Professor Perchek, I want to show you this. And I pulled him over to my poster. And I'm going and I'm speaking as animated as I can possibly be. And I knew I had him when I saw him look down at my name badge. He wanted to see, who is this guy? I knew I had Virgil Perchek, and he became a friend. You do this at poster sessions. You have opportunities as graduate students to go to meetings. You'll meet very famous people. Go and introduce yourselves. Don't sit in the back, sit right up front. I would sit right up in the front, right there. And I'd be drilled right in on them. And I wanted to be the first up there after the talk and say, I'm Jim Tour, I'm studying here, this is what I do. That was great. They'll remember you. Invite famous people for talks. I used to do this. I used to think of the most famous people in the fields that I was working in and the fields that I was writing proposals in. Then I would put them down as potential reviewers for the proposal, and I would invite them to give talks at the university. And taking people out to dinner is routine. And you forget the restaurants. You go out to dinner enough, you forget what restaurant was what. You go into somebody's home, you never forget. And I would invite them into my home for dinner. See my wife, see my children, and we would plan on this as a family. I would tell the kids, you cannot be yourselves. You have to be good tonight, right? And we'd get all prepared as a family. And when I was an assistant professor, I just had the two little girls at the time, and my wife would get them all decked out in ponytails and all these things. And we were on our best behavior, and they remembered that evening. And I wouldn't invite lots of colleagues because I didn't want the distraction. I wanted them to remember me, remember my home. And then I'd put them down as potential reviewers for my proposals and the papers that I'd send in. Very influential people. 3 people that I invited my first year as an assistant professor. 3 people, subsequent to my invitation, several years later, won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. 3 of them. So Alan McDermott, Bob Grubbs, and Dick Schrock. 3 people subsequently won the Nobel Prize. So I was choosing them right. I don't know if my inviting them had anything to do with their getting the Nobel. But this is where I was shooting. I was shooting right for the top. I'd say, I'd like you to come and visit the university. Oh, I'm so busy. I know. But just, not this semester, next semester, whenever you can make it. I was just persistent in their coming. So just maybe you can merge it in with one of your future talks. And they hate to, if they're a good guy, they don't want to disappoint the new assistant professor. They don't want to break his heart. And they would come. You invite famous people for talks, and then what happens is when you're coming up for promotion, you put their name down, and all of a sudden you got a really big shot writing a letter for you and say, yeah, I know this person. I know their work. I know what they've done. And they start to write letters for you, and you got to apply for all these awards when you're an assistant professor. All these things you got to do, and all these award programs and career awards and everything. You need key people writing for you. How do you get to know them? You invite them in your home. And I don't care if you have to cater it. I mean, you get them in your home in a setting where they're going to remember you. Invite key administrators over for dinner to your home. So I invited the president of the university. My colleagues were shocked. Why don't you start with the department chair? And then maybe go up to the dean. I mean, just go boom right to the president? One of my colleagues told me, why don't you dress your daughters in rags and say, well, this is the best I can do based on what you're paying me. But we got them all dressed up nice. And the president and his wife came over, and it was just them. He says, I've never been invited to a home like this. I'm always invited to big parties, big gatherings. And we sat together, we had a grand time together, and from that day, I was his friend. He knew me, I knew him, and we were friends. And every time we'd walk into a gathering, and I'm sitting there, and he's coming up, he'd always say, he'd always point me out. He knew me. You invite them. It sounds very strange. They don't get a lot of invitations from the lowly. And invite over key administrators for dinner to your home. Invite program managers and corporate leaders to your home for dinner. So I would invite the program managers, the people at the National Science Foundation, the people at the Department of Defense that were funding my programs. I said, come to my home for dinner. That was back in the day they were allowed to come for dinner. Now there's all these restrictions upon them in the U.S. that the people that you're funding can't buy you anything more than a cup of coffee. It's a very strange sort of system. But anyway, I used to invite them over for dinner because I wanted them to see my wife and children. If they were going to cut me from their program, they'd be having to think of my two little girls. And corporate leaders. So you invite people from big companies. I wanted to have an interaction with this guy at Chevron. I said, come over to my home for dinner. Bring your wife. Get to know us. He's a big shot at Chevron. Wanted to get to know. I wanted him in my home. I still do this. Important people come through. They're in my home. Important people come through the university. I say, come in my home. Come over for dinner. This is actively campaigning for your own career. These are things that you can do to advance yourself. You can say, well, no, I'm going to do it solely based upon my published work. Fine. I never could have pulled that off. I was working every string that I could pull, I was pulling. Befriend and show kindness to the secretaries, custodians, maintenance workers. I do that to this day. You know, the custodian who cleans my office, her name is Maria. I get in very early. She's going around very early, and whenever she steps in my office to straighten things up, I say, Maria, how's your family? How are your sons doing? She has 2 sons. Because if you ask somebody how they're doing, they say, fine. You ask somebody, tell me, how's your children? They'll never forget you. If you show interest in somebody's children, they will never forget you. The people that I value most in this world are the ones that have done good things for my children. You want to be on somebody's good side? Do something good for their children. Then they'll really remember you. The same thing works with God. You be nice to his son, he'll remember you. Befriend and show kindness to secretaries, to custodians, to maintenance workers. My colleagues say, how come every time you want something you get it? Because I've befriended these people. I just say, Maria, my light's out. Within an hour, there's a maintenance worker coming into my office to fix my lights. Everything. I say, Maria, I got a meeting in the conference room today. There's some students in there. It's not looking very clean. Oh, I'll take care of it. Boom. She stops everything to go and straighten up for me. These folks can make or break your career, especially the department secretaries. Learn to be nice to them. You give them a card. So my wife sometimes will make a little Christmas basket for Maria, the custodian. You do something nice to people. They'll remember you, because what happens is you get to be a professor, and we start to think a lot of ourselves, like we're really more than we really are. And we start to not acknowledge all the people that are cleaning up around us, all the people that are doing things. And when you stop in the hallway, anytime I see the custodians walking down the hallway, I say, tell me your name. What's your name? Do you have children? Just start inquiring about their children. I want to get to know them as soon as I see them. You always acknowledge the electrical workers and things. You never know when you're going to need them. You can have hard work, but coupled with a balanced family life. So this is something that I wrote in the Journal of the American Chemical Society. You see, these are all different projects that we've worked in my own group. And I was asked to write this from this article in 2007. It was something like transition from small molecule synthesis to soft materials. How did I transition my career? I was asked to write this article because I had won some award, and then they give you this opportunity to write sort of these general pieces. And here's what I wrote in this Journal of the Organic Chemistry. I said, I submitted 37 proposals in my first 36 months as a faculty member, and most of those as a single principal investigator, since collaborative proposals were less common in those days. So I worked very hard. Imagine submitting one proposal a month for the first 3 years. That's what I did. Now sometimes it was the same proposal reformatted, and as long as you put in there, I've submitted this proposal as well to such and such a place, in the unlikely event that both are funded, I will work with the program managers to make sure there's not duplication of funds or something like that. But I had to cover my bases. Some people can send in a proposal and boom, it's funded. No, I would just use a shotgun approach. I was going to overwhelm them. They were going to fund me, or I was going to choke them with proposals. And I just sent out a lot of proposals, very high energy. And this is back in the day when computers were much more simple. So do you know the cut and paste routine? I would leave a space, I would draw the chemical structures, and then cut them out and paste them in that space. Cut and paste, those words come from something that people used to do. It was a lot of work. And then you'd run off 12 copies of the proposal, and then you'd look through every page of every proposal to make sure the copier didn't miss a page or smudge a page. You had to look through every copy. And then you'd pack it all up and you'd send it to the National Science Foundation after filling out, all the crazy forms. Can you certify that you keep a drug-free environment? I mean, you'd have to be on drugs to say, no, I don't keep a drug-free environment. I mean, who's going to say such a thing? But you got to check this off in the United States. Yes, I certify it's a drug-free environment. Who's going to check that no, we don't have a drug-free environment? Anyway, so you fill out all those forms, you put the whole thing together, and you had to mail it in. It was a lot of work to mail in proposals. You didn't just hit a button at 4:59 p.m., boom, the proposal submitted. I mean, you had to plan long in advance to do this type of thing. So 36 proposals then was a lot. So I worked very hard. That's what I'm trying to underscore. I worked very hard. So you got to work hard to succeed. But in the midst of that, the next sentence is, later on in this I talk about, on the days of receiving declination of funding letters from the NIH, sadness certainly followed. I would always call my wife, Shireen, because she was repeatedly there to reassure me of my self-worth. And my children were still there to call me daddy. Hence, I endeavor to dwell only momentarily on the harsh and sometimes even unnecessarily personal comments of the reviewers. The treasure of a family to see you through your hard times in life when you're launching your career. This is what saw me through. These were really down moments. You know how much work you put into a proposal? And these reviewers can just dash it. Obvious, they hadn't even read it. I mean, I had comments like, this is the type of proposal that we'd expect from a postdoc that's never worked in the area. I mean, could you have said it more nicely? I mean, you really could have said it more nicely. Why'd you have to just crush me? And I'd call Shireen, and she'd say, you're going to succeed. God hasn't left you. You're going to succeed. You're a good man, and you're going to succeed. And that's what my wife would tell me. So though I worked very hard, I'm here to tell you, don't forego your family for your career. Your family is the one who can stand behind you. You get home, your kids say, Daddy, at least my kids love me. You pick them up, you hug them, you say, oh, I don't care what that reviewer said. My kids love me. You need children for that. You need little kids to hop up in your lap and take you by your finger and start pulling you to show you something that they made that day. This is what family does. I wrote this. This is a quote from the article. You can go to that article and read this. Talk about this sort of thing. They asked me, tell us about your career. And I talked about the importance of meeting people. The importance of valuing relationships. So much in our fields are based on relationships. But I also wanted the community to know how important it is to maintain a family and to not put your family on the chopping block just because you're trying to start your career. Your family can be the best support system that you have. Call this the circus reaction. You can take zirconocene dichloride, dibromomethane, and zinc shavings and stir it around at room temperature. for 3 hours in tetrahydrofuran and convert that oxygen to the methylene group. For those of you who are organic chemists, this is a very important reaction. It's equivalent of a Wittig reaction. And this has special meaning to me, this particular reaction. Why this particular reaction? Because I was a brand new assistant professor. I just set up the GC in the lab, and I had thought about what are the ways to convert a ketone to a methylene group, not having to go through the Wittig intermediate, which has certain restrictions, but very fast using a transition metal like this, and very simple chemistry. And I remember I set up that reaction, and I wanted to monitor it. But the circus was going on in town, and my wife was coming with my 2 daughters, and she was bringing them to the circus in town. And I'm daddy. I have to be at the circus with them. So I left my lab, and I go on down the hill because the circus was at the basketball arena of the university, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. I mean, a huge thing. And plus, as an assistant professor, it was a big expense for us as a family because my wife was not working outside the home. My students always had better cars than I had. So it was a lot of money to take a family of 4 to the circus. And I went to the circus and did the circus experience with my kids. Then my wife, I helped her put them in the car and take them back home, and I ran back up to the lab. And I took an aliquot of that reaction, and I shot it in the GC. And I saw this peak was very small, and I saw a new peak with a slightly lower boiling point than this. And I knew it was this, because a methylene group has a slightly lower boiling point than a carbonyl. And my heart just leapt. This was going to be the seeds of my first paper as an assistant professor. They call it the circus reaction because it was working while I was with my family at the circus. And it has a special place in my heart. And I came back, and very quickly, within I don't know, a matter of a week or 2, I put together enough examples to put together a paper and get it published in tetrahedron letters just to get my name out there. And that's the only time that I did most of the work, and I put the names of my students on the paper. Since then, they do most of the work, and they kindly put my name on the paper. But it's things like this that I look back on and I say, you know, how blessed I was. How blessed I was. And I remember that in the midst of all the business and all the work, I still had my family, and I was enjoying them, and these reactions are stitching together. So, with that, try the non-traditional things. Learn to write with a pen. Make friends. The value of family is nothing to forget. You want to value your family. Work hard coupled with a balanced family life. This is what you want to be able to do. So much so that to this day, my colleagues ask me, how did you do it? You know, Rick Smalley used to ask me about my family life. Rick Smalley, the great Nobel Prize winner who discovered Buckminster fullerene and C60, and he didn't have that happy of a family life. He went from one family to another, and he used to sit with me. He used to talk, tell me, how do you do this? How do you pull it off? Such a great scientist. And he realized what he had lost in his life by never learning how to build a family, where you had one spouse and you had these kids, and how you pull this off. You want to have an impact on your colleagues? Let them see a life like this. And that's something that they'll never forget. So don't forget your family in your ambitions and in your career, because that will be the best encouragement that you have. What I'd like to do is open this up for questions, and I'll answer them as best I can. But I want to get, I'd be glad to help you out and give you any other insight that I might think of on the fly. There's a microphone up here. Not that I need it to hear you, but because it's being recorded, that way we can get your question on here as well. Okay?
Hi, thanks a lot for that. I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of Chemistry.
God bless you.
I'd love to chat some chemistry if you have a couple minutes after this. A lot of great advice, and a lot of that really hits home for me. Just wondering if you have any extra advice for those who are early on in their graduate career. I've got a couple of my graduate students here. Just wondering if you have a little extra advice for those who might not be at the assistant professor level quite yet.
Right. So part of this, it goes directly to them. They certainly go to meetings and give posters and learn to meet these famous people. Sit right up in the front row. Don't think that because you're a student, you got to sit in the back. In fact, nobody's going to kick a student off the front row. You get special treatment. A student sitting on the front row is a big deal at a professional meeting. Go over to the person who's about to get up and speak. You'll see the famous person standing off on the side. Go up to them and say, I've always admired your work. You know, and just introduce yourself. Learn to build these relationships so that when you're an assistant professor, it's second nature. You're doing this type of thing. Some of my happiest days were days as a graduate student. My first daughter was born in my halfway through my third year of graduate school. I got married at the beginning of my second year of graduate school. And my wife and I reflect back on the relationships that we had together. And I really enjoyed my time. I never had any money, but I didn't need any money. I mean, it just you're kind of sheltered. I mean, you get enough to survive. And really enjoy those days. I had some rough times in my graduate work in that for the first couple of years I wasn't generating much data, and I had real questions about whether I could ever be a successful chemist. I had real questions about that. And I remember as a graduate student where I felt my professor was really hard on me, and I was working as hard as I could. When things aren't going well in the lab, you can be working very hard and it doesn't look like you're even working. Because every reaction you try doesn't work. When things are going really well, you don't have to work that hard because everything you do is working. And so I remember going up on top of a hill that overlooked the university and just saying, Lord, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to pull this off. And I set up a meeting with the chemical education instructor, thinking that maybe I'll just do chemical education because I'm obviously not going to make it as a researcher. And I remember going and having a discussion with him. Maybe I'd switch to his group and just do chemical education where, you know, you teach freshman chemistry your whole life, do science experiments and blow up balloons filled up with hydrogen and oxygen. And look at what's happened. And so you know, I persisted, and things started to work, and things started to get better, and they turned around. And I was learning the seeds of what I had to do, but nobody ever told me the things that I'm telling you today. All the things that I'm telling you today, I learned on the fly. I learned the hard way. I paid the price to learn these things. And I'm just telling you, you know, the things that worked in my life. And so these are treasures. These are what you need. But as a graduate student, if you're nice to a custodian, oh, they'll be nice to you. You be nice to the guys in the machine shop. I mean, they'll give you access to equipment at hours that you're not supposed to get access. They'll stop whatever they're doing to, you know, drill and tap a hole for you, you know, or something. And so I made very good friends because I'm a synthetic organic chemist with the glass blower, which was a very big thing in those days. Departments of chemistry had glass blowers that would make a lot of the glass, and I made very good friends with them. And I'd always ask the guy about his wife, and if I went into the glass shop, boom, he turned off his lathe, and he said, what do you need, Jim? And he would just do it on the spot for me. So these are things that you can even pull off as a graduate student. The same types of things that I'm telling you, you can pull this off. And I encourage you to enjoy your time as a graduate student. I certainly did, and even though I had those hard years and those pressing years, and those two especially hard years have helped me as a faculty advisor to understand the struggle that young people go through when nothing is working for them in the lab, and the extra effort that I have to go to as a graduate advisor to help them through this time and to assess what's going on, what's happening. I want to make sure you're okay. And if somebody doesn't show up to the lab and I haven't seen them or something, I call them on the phone. And it's not to track them down and say, get in the lab. I say, are you okay? What's the matter? What's going on? Are you okay? If you're not feeling well, can my wife and I bring you some chicken soup? And this is a good old Jewish tradition. I mean, if you're feeling sick, you eat chicken soup. I said, can we bring you chicken soup? They almost always say, no, it's okay, don't bother. But they'll never forget that I asked. And so there are seeds that you can start forming today, the very same things that I told you about. Does that help?
Hi.
Hi.
What happens if a student applies to grad school, gets rejected,
Yes.
but really likes the program? Is it good advice to go back and write to the school to ask what were the reasons for the rejection, or to try to find out what happened, or can you even try to apply the next year?
Well, my experience is this. Every time we've admitted somebody to graduate school that was initially rejected by the graduate committee, and that student is appealed to a professor, and professor intercedes on their behalf and tells the committee, look, I want this student, and it come in. That student has a very hard time in the department. The level of the department is going to be too tough for the student. They need to be in a chemistry department that's more suited to them. The worst thing that you can do is come to work every day and feel that I'm the weakest in the class. Everybody else is getting it. I'm just not getting it. Not every student in the United States needs to be at MIT. Not every student needs to be at Harvard. We have a great gradation of universities. I needed to be at Purdue University and not at a higher level university. I wasn't accepted to MIT. I wasn't accepted to Cornell. I was accepted to Purdue. And that was because of one poor grade in physics that I had when I was taking organic chemistry, and I had a kidney disease as a student, and it gave me a poor grade one semester in physics. And that kept me out of many schools, interestingly enough. But I ended up working for a man that would later become a Nobel Prize winner. And so you never know what the future holds for you. Not everybody needs to be at the top university. So I've learned this, where I've interceded for students that, they got all the ambition, just let them in. I have a terrible time in the first year of classes just maintaining the requisite B. So every time that I've bucked the system, it's not been the best thing for the student. Sometimes I'll see a student in the lab, and as an advisor, if you're advisors, PhDs advisors, this is something you really need to take to heart. If you see a student that is clearly very good, but things are just not working for them in the lab, and their passion, their heart is just not there, because you gotta want to have that PhD. You gotta really be pushing for that thing. And the passion just isn't there, and things aren't working. You know, I sit down with them, I said, tell me, what is it that you like? What is it that you like to do? And I do this with undergraduates as well. I used to see this young girl, and she was taking chemistry classes, and she just wasn't happy. She was pre-med. And I'd always see her with Norton's Anthology. Is John North here? Not here. She'd be walking around with Norton's Anthology. This is a book about that thick, full of great literary works. So what are you doing with this book all the time? At first I thought she was always carrying a big, big Bible. She said, oh no, this is Norton's Anthology. So I thought you're pre-med. She said, I just love this stuff. You love it? She didn't want to be a physician. She was miserable. But her parents wanted her to be a physician. I said, why don't you become a professor of English literature? You think I could do that? I said, absolutely. I mean, she just got all excited. And she went back and talked with her parents and said, no, you're going to be pre-med. She finally graduated. She went through a couple of years of depression, went to medical school, in and out with depression in medical school. Has never been happy. I've seen other young people where I've directed them into their areas of passion, and I see them on campus say, "Do you like your new major?" "It is great." And they're just all smiles. And in chemistry, they were just miserable because they were at the bottom of the class. And there was something there that just wasn't connecting for them. And my job as an advisor is to find what it is, help them to identify what it is that's going to really make them happy. And if that means leaving my group, you leave my group. I'm more interested in you as an individual than I am in you and your productivity in my group. Because if you're not meant to be here, you're not going to be productive anyway. So this is an important note to advisors. It's up to us to help people in this way.
Hi, my name is Sergio. I'm actually his PhD student. I was wondering, you said we should go and ask like the speakers questions and things like that,
Yeah.
but what do you ask those types of people when you're just sitting there and you see them waiting? What do you say?
Hi, my name is Jim Tour. I'm a student at Purdue University, and I've always admired your work.
What if you haven't always admired their work?
Well, I've admired your work. You know, I appreciate your work. I appreciate what you've done for the field. Thank you for doing that. They probably won't remember you, but if you've got a poster and you're animated at your poster and you can get them by the arm to come to your poster, they'll remember you then. So, you know, other times I would ask them about their science. I had real scientific questions, and I'd pepper them with questions. And so, and that was very good training for me, to listen to their seminar and go up to them afterward and ask them scientific questions. Everybody respects that. You know, that you were watching my seminar close enough to ask me a question. And sometimes I was embarrassed. I remember I walked up to Paul von Schleyer. Anybody remember Paul von Schleyer? Any chemists here remember Paul von Schleyer? Huge theoretical chemist. Big name, Paul von Schleyer. And I was a brand new assistant professor, and I went to a meeting he was speaking at. And he spoke, and I walked up to him afterward, and I said, I really enjoyed that theoretical chemistry talk. He said, "It's not theoretical chemistry, it's computational chemistry." You know, I just wanted to fall down and hide under the chair. He needed to learn to calm down a little bit, but anyway, I tried. Now, much later on, after my career was established, I remember going into Paul von Schleyer's office, and we had, a real, heart-to-heart talk, and I reminded him of what he said to me, and how it really hurt me. I remember I was a postdoc at Stanford, and George Whitesides was speaking in this symposium. Anybody heard of George Whitesides? Yeah, big name from Harvard, big name. He was a big name 30 years ago when I was a postdoc. He was a big name. So he's talking to somebody outside on this courtyard. It was, during one of the breaks or something. And I thought, well, I'll just move in close, so as soon as he's done talking with this other person, I can be the next one to talk, because everybody wanted to talk with him, and I wanted to meet him. And my question was this, was to ask him, what are the hot areas in materials organic chemistry that I should be thinking about? Because he was, really had started to move in that direction, and he was a trendsetter. So he's talking to this guy, and I'm just, I don't want to, it's not like I wanted to listen in on their conversation, but I wanted to be next. So I was just standing there quietly, and he's talking to this person, and he looks over at me, he says, "Yes?" I said, "Well, I just wanted to ask you a question." When he's done, he says, "Okay, you go sit over there. When I'm done with him, I'll call you." So I went and sat over there. And then I remember he was done with this person, and he goes to me. Some professors have no tact. They have no idea how much they can break the heart of a person who had admired them so much. But anyway, I asked my question, and he was very clear on what he thought and the direction, and it was helpful. The next time I saw him, it was at a Materials Research Society meeting. I was a couple of years into my being as an assistant professor. He attended that meeting because he's at Harvard, so he doesn't have to, he just gets on the T and just goes right down the thing, and he's at the meeting. He was speaking just before me. He got done speaking, I got up. He went all the way to the back of the big lecture rooms and is just talking to somebody, very rude. I'm giving a lecture. So I just ramped up my volume, and I'm going animated. And I see him, from the end, he looks at me and he starts watching me give this lecture. Then I start seeing him, he's walking up. He wanted to get closer. Then he sat down on the end and he's just watching. I knew I had him. He would never forget me after that day. And I remember going and talking to him afterward, and he said, when you do a sabbatical, come to my lab. And I did. A few years later, when I was doing a sabbatical, I went to his lab. So one of the things you have to have in our field is you have to have a thick skin. Reviewers are going to say very cruel things to you. They hide behind their anonymity, and they say very cruel things. And if you take it so personally, and some things you can't take other than personally because it was a personal attack, you gotta go over this. You can sit in the corner for half a day and suck your thumb and rock back and forth, but get over it, get up, and start going on again. You got to get, and sometimes you'll feel your advisor just said something to you that was so cruel. All right, you just got to get over this thing and press on, okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, Dr. Tour. My name is Kyle. I'm a first-year student here. I was just wondering, as a first-year student, what do you think, the best way is to, get to know professors and become their friends? Like you were saying, you invite them over to your house, but when you're renting out a $400 apartment, it doesn't really work out
I did
that well.
exactly that.
Okay.
I had a little apartment with my wife, and we used to invite faculty members from the chemistry department over. So we did that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and to this day, they haven't forgotten that I used to do this.
Right.
I mean, and I still joke about it this day with my wife. Remember one guy who was leaving, and he said goodbye, and he walked right into the bathroom. He mixed up which door was which, and so we still joke about that to this day. Anyway.
Okay, thank you. Because, as a professor, in terms of my own perception, you guys always seem really busy and preoccupied with other things. So,
Yeah.
for me, I always find it difficult to
understand.
talk to professors.
What I tell undergraduates is this. I give a similar lecture to undergraduates, and I say, you find out who the movers and shakers are in this university. You have enormous access to them purely because you're a student. And I say, invite them out for a cup of coffee. Send them an email. This guy, Neil Lane, who's on campus. I tell my students, Neil Lane has gotten so many coffee invitations from my student. Write to him. Say, I'd like to take you out for a cup of coffee, or I'd like to take you out to lunch to the pavilion on campus. Spend the $5, buy them lunch, and get to know them. They generally won't allow you to spend money on them. They'll pick up the tab anyway. But they'll never forget you after that. And you need to study their website so you see what they're doing, and then talk to them. And it's not just the chemistry professors. There's other movers and shakers. So I was having this very conversation with two undergraduates at a coffee shop on campus. Who walks up is the president. The president of the university walks up in the coffee shop to get a cup of coffee. I said, right there's the president. Invite him to sit with us here at the table. Invite him. Go invite him. I just told you, do it. The guy goes, he says, we're sitting over there. You want to join us for coffee? The president says, sure. So he sits down, and they had learned how did you become president? How did you go from becoming, being just a regular professor to being president of a university? How does that happen? And he's talking about, his visits to Myanmar and all of these things. And I had another appointment. So finally I said, you're going to have to excuse me. And I left them there with the president and the two students. But he's a big boy. He can handle himself. But you meet people that way. It's unusual. I'll guarantee you that. It is unusual. But when I was a postdoc in particular at Stanford, I made it a point to tap into all this amazing expertise that was there. And I would not only go to my own professor, but I would go to other professors. I remember Jim Coleman, J.P. Coleman. Anybody heard of J.P. Coleman? Wrote the book Coleman and Hegedus, organometallics book. And I would go to J.P. Coleman's office and talk with him, and start to build a relationship. I hear that Linus Pauling was going to be speaking to a group of students. Boom! I was in that room. And Linus Pauling, you ever heard of Linus Pauling? I mean, is it? And I was right there. I was going to be in Linus Pauling's face. And I remember he was trying to describe something, and he looked around the room, and there was no periodic table. So he just started drawing the periodic table on him. And he was in his 90s at the time or something, around 90 years old, and he was just going gangbusters. He said vitamin C was really helping him or something. But you can certainly do that and tap into their expertise. So I would go to other professors that might be able to help me with the chemistry that I was working on, and I'd ask them questions, and they'd get to know me because I was in their office. Now, some professors you just can't get to know because they're so standoffish and they got personalities that are just terrible, and that's their loss. But other ones, you're a student, you have enormous access to them. And if you want to start a company someday, and go and meet some of the professors in the business school. Say, hey, I'd like to take you to a cup of coffee, and tell me, how is it you start a company? How do you go about these sort of things? Tap into the expertise that's there. The vast majority of students never do that. So the number of coffee invitations that most professors get is 0. So when they get yours, it's not like one in a mass of them. Right. It's only yours. Okay?
Thanks so much. Hello, Professor Tour. I'm Jeremy Vandenberg.
We met last night.
Yeah, we met, and
this afternoon.
Yeah, I didn't give you my name, but I'm in my final year engineering here. I'm just wondering, as we go into grad school, what's the best way for grad students to promote the community and help each other out in the graduate setting?
Well, you can certainly be an encouragement one to another. You can be an encouragement. There's so much negativity. Oh, it's terrible here. Everything is bad. The weather's bad. The administration's bad. The professors are mean. You can take a situation and speak one positive word into that and change the whole tenor of a conversation of a group. You say, I've kind of liked it here. And I'm kind of excited here. And all of a sudden, oh. So even just speaking a word of encouragement can help out other people. And that doesn't mean that you have to constantly be nursing people along. Just speaking a word of encouragement can be a real help to people. I loved my time as a graduate student. I thought it was great. I had that struggling 2 years, but overall, it is a great, great time as a graduate student, and tap into the expertise that's all around you. And other people will see that and they'll learn from you. Be a model.
Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Irfan, and I'm a PhD student at the Department of Civil Engineering. Right. So just wanted to get more personal about the family thing. Yeah. You told us all the fruitful things about the family life with the PhD, with the grad student. Now let's be the devil's advocate and share your experience when you had arguments with the wife during your grad student because you're not earning enough and you're like poor. You're poor. So how did you tackle that?
That was interesting. So I rarely ever worked nights. I would get in the lab at 6 in the morning, leave at 6 in the evening. Rarely ever would come in the evening. And one day, my wife and I had an argument. So where am I going to go? I went to the lab. As soon as I walked in the lab, one kid from Iran looks up at me and says, "What, you have an argument with your wife?" Oh, man. So these things happen. And you work your way through these things. My wife and I have gone to professional counseling several times. And we get tune-up, and we're better. What we went through was not magical. She's from a different culture than I am. So we had marriage that was, the difficulties were exacerbated. The way she views family was very different than the way I view family. So close to her sisters that she had to talk to every one of them every day. I'm like, can you just speak twice as much today and then not call them tomorrow? And there were lots of issues like this. And I remember, there were some counselors that we would go together and we would go once and we'd get out of there. We thought, man, we know more than this guy. I mean, this guy's an idiot. And we joke about it. But I remember we went to see this one counselor who was a professor at the university. And he talked to both of us and he said, Jim, I want you to know something. Your wife is a normal sinner. You are a messed up sinner. And I said to him, okay, whatever you tell me to do, I will do. I want to get this thing right. And we never went in, never had the intent of getting a divorce. We were going to work this thing out. And I'll tell you, within a matter of a couple of sessions with him, I was set. And he'd tell me things that I needed to do to get right. And things got better. And then you go through things, things happen, and then you go in for another tune-up. It's just like with a car. I mean, it gets better and even fixed, and then after a while you need to do some preventative maintenance here. And marriage is like that. You do have to work things out because things aren't always sweet. But what I'll tell you, what's really sweet is that when you work it out, your family life becomes all the stronger. All the stronger. And you end up looking back at things and just laughing. Remember you did this? Yeah, remember you said this? We just laugh about this. Now, we look back and reflect on it, and we go back and forth, particularly because I'm a very strong personality. And my wife is very gracious, but she's learned that for survival, she's got to stand up to me. I don't just dominate the whole thing. Ta-da, I'm home. Everybody stop what you're doing and take care of me, sort of thing. So you work this thing out and it becomes all the richer. I have, on my website, I have a series called Scriptural Sexual Ethics. And it's predominantly for young married couples. And it's a 6-part audio series. So if you went to jmtour.com or just Google Jim Tour, you go to my website, all the way at the right there's a personal topics section. So nobody can ever say, oh, you've mixed that with your chemistry. No, you went to personal topics, it's your fault. You shouldn't have clicked it. You go there, and it's under audio files, and under series, Scriptural Sexual Ethics. And it deals with the heart of man and the heart of woman. It's a 6-part audio series. You can just download it or listen to it, just web stream it. And each part is about 30 minutes. It's about 3.5 hours in total. And if you listen to this with your spouse, it will change your marriage. And I know this because many people write to me and they say, we are different because of this. We're getting along so much better. I know even my own students, I've sent them there and they say, this is amazing. And what it is predominantly, it is what does it mean to be a man and what does it mean to be a woman? And working through that relationship.
Okay.
All right?
Thanks for
Okay.
I'm a graduate student in math, and I just had a question. I don't have an issue approaching people, but I'd like to build a network. I have an issue sort of carrying on conversation. I was wondering the best way to learn how to do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Are you married?
No.
All right. So the more you try, the better you're going to get. You don't have to stay there. All right? That's the word. You don't have to stay there. I'll bet there are courses here or group sessions in a university this size that can help you with some of this. to learn how to have a conversation, to learn how to interact. And if you force yourself into interaction, you will get really better at it. Let me give you an example, which may not apply to you at all, but I'll give you an example. I can walk up to anybody and talk to them about Jesus Christ. That's not an easy thing to do. Most people have a lot of apprehension about this. And I can walk up to anybody and say, do you believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ? The reason I can do this is because I did door-to-door campus ministry. When I was a student, as an undergraduate and as a graduate student, I knocked at Purdue University, which was a big university even 30 years ago. I knocked on every door of every apartment around Purdue University. Hi, my name's Jim Tour. I'd like to speak with you about Jesus Christ. You get almost every door slammed in your face. But after a while, you're like, there's no problem. Just having a regular conversation about chemistry with people, no problem. Very smooth. So what I'm saying is if you force yourself to do certain things, you will get better and better at this. And so that you're really able to carry on a conversation like this. Okay? And so, I can be sitting on an airplane, and depending on how I can start up a conversation with a person in an instant next to me on an airplane. And I can sway a conversation based on my response to them. So if I want to have a conversation, what kind of work do you do? I teach nanotechnology. Oh, wow, tell me about that. If they say, what do you do? I say, I share Jesus Christ with people. Oh, man. Then I can just be myself. I don't have to talk with them. I can just change a conversation based on a word. You see what I mean? You could do that. You can learn to do that. But I was actually just like you. I was very shy. When I was a kid, my sleeves were always chewed up. I was so nervous. I was always chewing my sleeve. And my mother used to always tell me, look at the adult in the eyes. I could never look at them. I'd always be looking down. And so I tell people I'm basically a shy person. When I say that, my wife always bursts out laughing. But it's true. I would rather stand in a corner in a gathering and not engage with people. That's what if it were just me, that's what I would rather do. But I make a real effort to go out and to step out and to engage with people, and especially to eye out the person who's all alone, the person that no one's talking with. And I will gravitate to that person and just start talking with them. It's something that I've learned to do, so you don't have to remain there. But you're at the age where you can learn to do that. But if you don't learn to do it very soon, you'll be unable to change it. Remember, in your 20s, you can change. Once you hit 30, these interconnects in your brain harden up. It's no longer plastic, and it's much, much harder to change. You need to change this very soon because there's not much time left. You need to start working at this, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Well, we will call it then a session. Thank you very much.